Hello everyone, my name is Cactus and welcome back to the Cactus Patch. Today we have a very exciting episode of the Cactus Patch. Today with episode 11, we're talking about LUTI and of course the recent season 15, and who better to join us than the head TO of LUTI themselves, Emil. Emil, how are you doing today?
Yo, Mr. Cactus, thank you. I'm very good. It's nice to be here. I've not seen all the previous episodes, but I'm very honored that I'm a singular guest on this episode. Makes me sound very important. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course, it's a pleasure to have you. I mean, it's considering that you have one of the most successful events in the Splatoon community. I mean, you've done amazing work. So honestly, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very glad that LUTI has run for this long and that people are still enjoying it. There's lots of different types of tournaments. I think LUTI is basically the ultimate tournament of the community, where basically everyone seems to have a pretty good time. So I'm very happy that I've been able to host it for this long. And not, of course, by myself. It's always been a group of people that have helped me quite significantly.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to stand at near the top of it.
So for those who might not maybe know who you are and everything, why don't you give us a little bit of a background about maybe how you got into the Splatoon community, what kind of drove you to kind of host LUTI, just so people get to know like who you are.
Sure, I am a Splatoon 1 veteran. I've played Splatoon for quite a long time. Um, I started Splatoon 1 in a team called On the Bounce, which is a team that if you played Splatoon 1, I think you'll know On the Bounce. If you've never played Splatoon 1, you probably will not, because they're sort of been disbanded for about 5 years. I think I'm still technically a part of the team. Maybe I'm the only member of the team now, or it's a very small group that can be considered a team now. But back in the day, I used to play a lot of high-level competitive Splatoon as well. Um, in Splatoon ones, I think this was season two, season three, that sort of era. I used to play in the highest division in LUTI. I've won some Dutch tournaments, like the Dutch national championships as well. I can't say I've ever been like a top five player in the game or anything. I don't think
Hmm.
I've been that high. Um, but I've played my share of competitive team in my share of competitive teams. Maybe well, just the one, but in tournaments. Um, and from that, because a lot of the people, or some of the people, specifically Nyok, who was on that team, hosted LUTI and hosted lots of tournaments. I did as well. And I've hosted a lot of tournaments as well outside of Splatoon. I've hosted chess tournaments, in real life tournaments, that sort of thing. So I've always been this type of person. So eventually I decided to take over LUTI, or I've been allowed to take over as LUTI head TO. And I've run mostly LUTI, not done that much competitive playing anymore for the past, I would say, 3 years. It's mostly been younger people that have outgrown me at this point. Uh, but I've been hosting LUTI, and I've recently graduated um, from university with a master's in stochastics. So I have my first sort of really real job now as a data scientist at a uh, company that does research for um, market economics and transport and that sort of thing. So I'm quite excited.
Oh, that's so awesome! Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so cool. That's awesome. Wow. So Splatoon 1 veteran, and you took over LUTI. So so you actually got to experience just being a part of LUTI, but as a competitive player first before ever like working on it as well.
Exactly. In Splatoon, in the very, very first season, I think I've TO'd it from season two. The very first season I wasn't a part of. It
Hmm.
was created as a community effort. The community really felt like they needed a league.
Yeah.
And I think in the Splatoon in the LUTI blurb as well, if you look at the FAQ, the frequently asked questions,
Hmm.
at the top it says like, "Oh, what is LUTI? Who made it?" That sort of thing. It was this group of players, along with quite a few others, that was very excited to host LUTI. Um, but after a season or two, they noticed that it really was a lot of work.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it was 10 people that were basically nonstop doing this. And after a season or two, most of them burned out and they sort of stopped. Um, and I'm the type of person who I think is able to do some of these automatically, right? I'm sort of streamlining the entire process.
Yeah.
I'm willing to put in hours, and I like doing it as well. So when a lot of them stopped and a lot of them decided, oh well, this is quite a lot of work for me to do.
Hmm.
I took over and I've always been part of the process, I would say, because I mean Nick was, as I said, was part of it from the very first season.
Hmm.
Um, I I TO'd it not as head TO, I think from season two up until maybe around season five. I think from season six, I probably was the head TO. And I mean, we've been through a lot of staff members at that point, but
Hmm.
yeah, it was really a burst of energy from the initial 10 people that made LUTI, but then immediately dropped off as they realized how much work it was.
Yeah, I feel like for like any kind of event that's put on, like once people really get a taste of just the sheer like energy needed to help run these events, it could be overwhelming. It could be a lot.
Yeah, and LUTI specifically, right? Because back in the day, back in season, in the very first seasons,
Hmm.
almost everything was done manually, right? But it was
Yeah.
also more feasible because, of course, in the very first season, there were maybe 60, 70 teams,
Hmm.
which, I mean, for any tournament, that sounds like a massive amount, right? And I mean, it
Yeah.
is. I'm not trying to discount anyone who's, hosting a tournament and is happy that they have 60 teams, because, of course, that's, a very, very, very good amount for a tournament. But still, 60 teams you can do with some preparation.
Yeah.
But as we're on now and doing seasons of, 400, 500, 600 teams, it's a different order of magnitude, right? So you can't specifically give that much attention to any particular team and any particular thing, right? Any team, back in the day, you could um, put a team logo in and we might edit it, or we
Hmm.
might make sheets for every team, and you have a part of every team on a website or something. And that's just not really feasible anymore with just
Yeah.
the sheer number of teams we have. So we do their overviews and doing a lot of things automatically. And the seeding council, of course, is a massive help. And there's a lot of they do a lot of the heavy lifting as well in the early days when LUTI is most time consuming to run.
Yeah, I mean, cause think about it now, like the most of recent, I don't remember the last season had like almost 600 teams enter. So going from, back then 60 to 70 to almost like quintuple the amount is crazy to think about. But it's good to hear that like throughout the years, there's been processes in place that's made it so much easier to handle and to figure out whether it comes to seeding or sorting out brackets or divisions. It's become a lot easier than it used to be.
This is also the reason, honestly, why we're doing challenge. And I know everyone hates challenge. I think I'm the only person in the entire community who likes challenge. But challenge is so nice because you can copy paste a list of teams and it'll make a bracket, and it won't complain, and it won't lag, and it'll just do it.
Okay.
And I was doing it on the because we were doing this release stream, right,
Yeah.
for LUTI divisions and that sort of thing, which we did, um, which was also just an absurd thing, by the way, because we had 1,000 viewers in just a couple minutes, and
Hmm.
it was cobbled together in like hours. At the last minute, we just decided to do a stream, and on another screen there was a major tournament going on, and major streamers were streaming, and it got like 400 or 500 views, and we're like, how do we get? Just the amount of people that are interacting with this is insanity, in my opinion. Um, um, what was the point that we were getting to again? I'm
um.
just every single time we're talking about this, I'm like, oh, the
Yeah.
amount of people is just insane. But
Yeah. I mean,
yes, this
it's
entire
yeah. People ever just join and just funnel in to just see this season take place. So knowing that just every year just grows and grows and grows, just like you mentioned, this stream being put up, having over 1,000 viewers at one point to reveal the divisions was just incredible.
yeah, and it's a very different type of tournament than other tournaments. Oh yeah, challenge. But
Hmm.
on the background of that stream, I was just putting the teams in challenge, and it took like 30 seconds or a minute to go through each division, right? And in the
Hmm.
background, I was putting in the teams of each division, and I managed to do 11 divisions in 10 minutes,
Wow.
which is what other tournament is gonna put 600 teams in a bracket seeded in 10 minutes, right? That's just not
Yeah.
possible on any other stage. So this is the sort of thing they have to streamline. I think if we do this on Battlefy or Smash UG, it's just going to be impossible. But then again, maybe someone is really good at Battlefy and is screaming in chat right now, no, Battlefy, just do this code and this bot, and then it's all fine. And it's possible as well. But there's a lot of things like this that you have to streamline, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't. Um, and I'm not trying to invite people to into doing foul play in this with this. But we don't really look that hard at a lot of the transfers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it sort of looks good, it's fine. Maybe back in the day when there were 60 teams, you would look at every transfer and then you would decide, okay, this person is trying to join this team, and then you would look at their tournaments and you would, come to a discussion about whether they were able to join. At this
Mm-hmm.
point, if someone is trying to join, it will be just like, yeah, that's fine. I'm not
Yeah.
going to look at 600 teams transferring in, three people each, and then we're not going to discuss 1,800 people joining the tournament. We'll just be like, yeah, that's fine, unless there's a clear. But there's a lot of these types of things which maybe if you had 20 staff members who were all very interested and all did this as a near full time job
Mm-hmm.
and full time streamers and that sort of thing, maybe you could make it even better. Um, but but over the course of the years, we decided to do certain things and not do other things, and that has helped as well.
Yeah, I mean, considering that most, like, again, like for those who maybe who always aren't aware, but like most, you guys do this out of your own time. You're not getting paid for something like this. This is just something that you enjoy doing, and you love helping the community and put together. So, it makes sense that when people try to like invite a player in for a transfer, that it makes sense to not always have to have a like 100% full discussion if they can actually go to that team in that division, because like you mentioned, if one there could be one single day 20 plus teams are having a new member, and it's like, well, all right, like we could either all take a ridiculous amount of time trying to sort out if this player can even go to those teams in that division, or we could take a quick glance, see what it looks like, and if it feels right, sure, go on ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, there's just the amount of teams, but also, yeah, I'm not getting paid to do this. In fact, I'm spending money to do this quite frequently on things like, prizes for the fantasy bracket, prizes for winning LUTI in principle, that sort of thing. We've done that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
They've basically all come out of pocket. So I'm definitely not getting paid to do this. As I'm getting a job now, some things are easier. I'm able to maybe pay for things more easily,
Mm-hmm.
but not spend as much time during the weekday because the job is, 8 to 6, so you can't really spend that much time throughout the
Yeah.
day looking at brackets and looking at transfers. But I think I'm very happy with how it's been run right now. It's the ultimate tournament as run. Um, I personally can't think of any other tournament that's run longer than LUTI. And I understand that we're not doing it consecutively, right? That we're
Yeah.
taking breaks and that sort of thing. And that's really good. Um, yeah, I can't think it. I don't think Dapples has a tournament that's run for longer. I don't think Alice has run a tournament. That would be my first instinct, like a paddling pool or something. They
Mm-hmm.
definitely have more tournaments than we have. I mean, Alice is part of Luti staff as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as the ultimate all tournament, that's still running and still honestly, after 15 seasons, we're still growing, which is I don't understand where these people are coming from. I don't understand how there's 600 teams and then next season they're like, oh, let's have all those sign up and then 100 extra. Like, where are all these extra people coming from? I don't understand. But it is really nice as well. In Luigi, it really feels like you get to see every new wave of people coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Right, every single season you get a couple hundred new teams, and a lot of them have a lot of new people on it, and you're like, oh, I guess we just get to see the new wave of talent that comes in, and most of them sign up for Luti, so it's really a concentrated pool where you can see everyone who's up and coming and that sort of thing, and I think that's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I think last season, season 14, was the largest season ever, right? With teams that signed up.
Yeah, I believe we had over 600. I think you said under six. I think almost 600. I
Yeah,
think
I
we
think it
had
was almost 600.
620 or something.
Wow.
I forget as well.
I
It's
mean, it's
too
still like,
it's too big.
yeah, I was about to say that's still an incredible amount of teams that entered. And like you said, like, I mean, you get to see a great view of it, especially with something like Ludi, which is in this community one of a kind. I don't really know of many other events that are run in this community that are season based and that are run in the fashion of how Ludi is run, where you have multiple stages of, in a sense, almost like a group stage into a bracket over a period of weeks. treated like a real league. You know what I mean? And I think that's the fun of it. There's not a lot of leagues that happen in this community, so it's really cool to see that this is pretty much is like, to me, I feel like this is the longest running league or event that we've ever had in the community, and it's amazing to see it still stick around, still record break numbers. And of course, like you said, with the new talent, kind of go against the old talents as well. It's so cool every time
Yeah.
to see older teams that have been around much longer, uh, have their chance once again at LUTI, hoping to win a higher division, and these new players and new teams come out of nowhere and they just maybe destroy their division.
Yeah, and of course, we have seen other leagues before, right?
Mm,
Back in the day, I think, I mean, I'm not sure if Tassel is even considered a league. It's definitely an invitational sort of thing.
mm,
You had Black and Spoon did some sort of league, usually a lot more money based, right? You had maybe fewer entrants, but it was more of a spectacle
mm,
with higher quality streams of every single game being streamed and with invites. And of course, you have Dimitri who's doing the French league and Alice who's doing the German league, and I think there's the league, the United States League, the scholarly league between the different university teams and that sort of thing. And
mm.
there's more leagues that I'm probably missing. Um, but LUTI is still incredibly unique, indeed, because it mixes these two things of being long and being worldwide, right? A lot
Yes.
of these more active, more explosive leagues that maybe ran, like the Back and Spoon type of things, they were amazing and they were a spectacle, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. But it was still only like a season or 2 seasons, right? So you can't continually join it, and maybe also if you're a lower level player, you might not be able to join it if it's an invitational. Um, and similarly, if you're, playing in the university league in the United States, you won't be able to enjoy it if you're not, you know, part of that university, if you're not part of that entire system,
Yeah.
if you're too old for it, if you're too young for it, if you don't have the particular team for it, that sort of thing. Um, and that makes LUTI very special because not only is everyone able to join it, everyone basically seems to have a good time. I mean, back in the day, you had a lot of people complaining about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it was fair, other of it was sort of, a bit weird. Had a lot of weird people. Um, but this is also why I'm really enjoying hosting it. It's just because it's the ultimate tournament that everyone seems to like and be one for. And I think it's a very unique way of playing as well that you don't get in other tournaments. It's a very unique and fun experience. Anyway, when I played it, I had that impression. So I'm hoping that it still is.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's played in, I want to say the last 3 or 4 seasons, my favorite part that I've enjoyed when I've always played in Ludi is the fact that you get to go against teams that usually you wouldn't go against before, and in a sense, you have the opportunity to build a scrim partner. You have potential to kind of treat it like a scrim in a sense, right? Where it's like that consistent, where you have potentially a new match every week for up to 6 weeks. So it's definitely really enjoyable to know that you have consistency almost for certain for like once a week you will have a match against a team that best of 9. It will go towards obviously like the actual event itself, and there's always that opportunity to for all go against really wacky and weird comps, because I've had my fair share of I think this is like my third different division I'm playing in for Ludi, so it's fun to see the different comps that different levels get to compete in, that usually you don't get to see all the time, that maybe you see one-offs in a tournament. And of course, always there's always the fun part that since everybody kind of streams nowadays, you get to see a lot of people doing a lot of digging, a lot of research, and you don't get that all the time when you get to compete in tournaments.
Yeah, there's growth in this research are two probably the main aspects that people like about it as well. And I'm not saying Luti is perfect, right? A lot of the scheduling can be annoying. Some opponents can be annoying, but as you said, it's really nice first of all to be able to see your growth, right? If you're playing in multiple different divisions, it's sort of nice to I mean, it's not perfect. It's not, I understand that it's not the most accurate and that it's only an approximation and it's a
Hmm.
team thing and that sort of thing. But you still get some sort of growth, right? You
Yeah.
still see some sort of improvement. And this crim thing is also, that's probably my favorite part is you just get the best practice, in my opinion. And this is not just about Splatoon. I think this applies to a lot of games,
Hmm.
is particular practice and sort of engage practice into specific aspects of it. right? Which is something that you do for LUTI and basically not any other tournament, right? Basically, any other tournament, you show up at the time, you look at the map list, and then you're like, okay, what we're doing here, this sounds good. Let's just go with whatever we're always doing, right?
Yeah.
But for LUTI, you get an entire week to practice. Well, you're probably not even practicing game nine that much, right? It's usually like the first 6 or 7 maps that you're really practicing.
Yeah, if
And
you're
you
able
can
to.
honestly spend an entire day on one map and just practice it so well. And this has to do with basically anything that I've played, right? It's the same with chess that I'm doing, right? It's the same with basically anything else where you're like, you could just show up and play, but sometimes to grow, you also need to put in some dedicated hours practicing some specific things, getting better at specific aspects. And that's something you can practice in LUTI, and it's really hard to do everywhere else because every game in LUTI can be very crucial. You know, you're going to get a good game, so it's worth practicing for. And being able to work together with a team to decide, whatever wacky comp you want, or maybe you want a super solid comp, or maybe you want to try out a few wacky comps and a few solid comps to see what works better,
Hmm.
right? That sort of thing. And you can practice on specific maps. I think that's really good. And because these maps also show up quite frequently, it's not wasted practice. So even if you're, eh, playing on, I don't know, Ingbot Art Academy, Tower Control or something, you've really practiced a match and a perfect plan, and then it turns out your opponents just crumble in like 10 seconds and you insta win,
Yeah.
then probably, either you'll play the same map in 3 weeks and you'll be able to use the same plan, or the same map will show up in another tournament. So you'll still have a really interesting approach for a next set or a next time, and some good practice with your teammates, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Most like absolutely, because I think my favorite part is like there's always teams out there, and this has been a consistent thing with teams I've coached, teams I've been on. There's always those handful of map modes combinations that teams say that that's their worst or that they don't know how to play on it. And LUTI gives them that opportunity to learn from it because, like you said, teams could spend a lot of time focused on just that one, map and mode combination to just almost perfect it. And I think that is so cool that there's like a drive to learn that with LUTI, where for other tournaments, it's like, yeah, it might show up in this tournament, but we don't play it as much as we do the other.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was drinking some tea.
No, you're
Do you
fine.
know what tea I'm drinking?
What tea?
LUTI.
The LUTI.
Yeah, that was the worst joke there's ever been, but maybe also the only joke that's ever been on the podcast. So, I'm trying.
I mean, it's the least harmful. I'll say that for sure. We've had some wacky
No, but
combos on
yeah,
here.
no, but it's basically just a unique experience, right? I'm not trying to
Mm,
blow up this tournament as if it's some godlike thing, and we're the best and
yeah.
everyone else is crap or whatever.
Mm,
But I think there's a reason that a lot of people are signing up, and it's a lot of work, but I think it's definitely worth it because for a good amount of work, you do get 3,000 people that are having really at least a moderately enjoyable time.
mm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's also it helps that like the Ludi divisions have become the way I see it, such a staple in the competitive scene because you can't find one free agent post or one looking for team post that does
Yeah.
not include something about a division. And I think it's so amazing that we have something in our community that helps drive the competitive scene into aiming to get better, right? And these teams will grind these tournaments and grind the efforts, scrim, solo queue for better mechanic skill, you name it, because they want to be able to enter the next LUTI season and show that the work they paid off got them farther than maybe they were before when they either did have a previous division or just didn't have one at all.
And yeah, it's absolutely a point where, and also honestly, I'm trying to say as if it's the best tournament ever, but as you're exactly saying, part of the reason why there's so many people joining is that a lot of people just want a number next to their name
Yeah.
that signifies how good they are, even though that's obviously not the intent of this. And obviously, every time you ever speak to a staff member, they're going to be like, yeah, it's a Ludi division. It's just a way to seed our tournament. It's not a number that signifies the worth of your existence.
Yeah.
It's just like a thing for a tournament. And maybe if you joined a different team, your number would be different. And
Yeah.
in 3 months you will be playing better and your number will be higher, or maybe there will be newer, younger people and your number will be worse, and it doesn't really matter, right? But it's still, you know, I'm still of the opinion that it's roughly a decent approximation, right?
Hmm.
And you don't, I think it's going to be really bad if people, there's sort of good and bad ways of looking at it. It's going to be really bad if people automatically, you know, discard you for having a number that's like one too high or one too low of the thing that they want. And maybe you're playing well in tournaments, but you haven't been on this particular team with this particular number next to your name. And now you're like, oh, you can't be on your team because you don't have that number next to your name. That's too bad. Right. I think that's a very bad way of doing things.
Yeah.
But it's still like if you're a team that's playing in like Division 8 and you want to play sort of a nice practice match against another team, and there's two teams and one is playing in Division 1 and the other in Division 7, you're probably better off playing against the team in Division 7 and you'll have a better match, right? And that doesn't mean that, the team in Division 7 can't be better than the Division 1 team in like a year, or maybe they have weird seeding or whatever.
Hmm.
But a lot of the time, it's still a reasonable approximation and just gives you a general idea, right? And as long as you're not over hyping and not putting too much importance on that number, it can be a really fun thing to aim towards. And I mean, any target in this game, any value that you put next to your name, it's always going to be, you know, not ideal, right? X
Yeah.
power, I would say, is way worse than LUTI divisions.
Yeah.
Uh, no power, it's reasonable. It's sort of ELO-like, but also, you know, it has its fair shares of problems, and people can rise, hundreds of points in a particular day, depending on matchups and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And if you're one of your teammates just rage quits, you lose a lot of points and that sort of thing. So it's every measure is bad, right? There's not one your entire worth, your entire existence can't be put to a single number. But people still want a number, and I think it's one of the more reasonable ones, even though it's not ideal and entirely valuable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you put it best, especially with like the X power thing, because I remember back when I first got into competitive in the S2 era, I remember how important it was that people included their X rank powers. And I just
Yeah.
remember thinking like, you really could just have that one player that plays a completely different weapon in the competitive scene, but when it comes to like let's say Rainmaker and X rank, they play Sploosh and then have like almost a 3k power because all they do is just dive for the Rainmaker.
Yeah, the matches are so different, but yeah, it's still really nice to work towards, and people have different goals. And even if the goal that you're working towards isn't valuable,
Hmm.
still, I mean, it's the most cliche thing ever, but it's the journey that's important, right? And not the goal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
even if you're like, oh, I'm aiming to be a Division 3 player or whatever, right? That's great, right? Even if the Division 3 thing is entirely arbitrary and it doesn't, have any particular amazing meaning, it's still a good goal, and so you can work towards it and you can work with your team, and when you reach it, it's really good, and then you might be able to progress further, right? It's still a nice thing to aim for, and I think it's still really nice to have that option at least, right? Because a lot of games don't really have that option, right? A lot of games also work very differently. In-game, there's really not much to work for other than, a solo power that means very little. So I think it's nice to have something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. There's something to work towards. And like you said, the experience of LUTI is always a fun one. I mean, I know people like always make the joke like once you're halfway through LUTI, like, oh, who's disbanding next? And I think that's interesting
Mhm.
because, there's always that challenge of where you're playing with your team so much, like some teams anyway, are playing much more consistently during LUTI with each other than maybe they normally would. Maybe they'd only play twice a week, where it's like one tournament and then maybe a scrim. Some teams maybe only enter in tournaments together. But then you have LUTI where you're looking to scrim maybe 1 to 3 times a week. Then you have your LUTI match, and then you're repeating that consistently. There's always the possibility you get sick and tired of each other.
Yeah, there's definitely different teams, and I've noticed this as well, where um, I mean, this is the case in every sport, but in every sport you have, I think in soccer it's called tournament teams and league teams, right? Where some
Mhm.
teams just aim to win, and other teams, they're fine with just scraping by with a draw and progressing to whatever's needed. And
Yeah.
similarly, I think you have LUTI teams and you have tournament teams where
Yep.
some teams really shine in this environment where, and this I think is generally also older teams that know they can practice for certain things, that have trust in each other. Maybe even teams consisting of players that haven't played the game in 3 years and then all join back for a LUTI game and have that sort of thing. And they always tend to shine in LUTI, even against these newer coming up teams that might, outplay them, a year down the line. But for now, they still get really good practice. And some teams really shine where you get to practice with each other. You have to have fun with comps, and it's just a different environment compared to most tournaments.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like some teams, like even like you said, like to only pick up for certain events, like how we always have pickup teams for tournaments. There are pickup teams for LUTI. Like for me, I actually joined a pickup team for LUTI. Like this is not even an actual team I'm on, and we're going through what most teams go through for just the one day over a whole season. So we don't know really how each other play, but we had our first scrim the other night while we're trying to figure out our LUTI match. It's like, hey, like we're learning new things about each other and how each other play and how we can go off each other, and it's so much more of a consistent kind of pickup style where for all you know by the end
Luti
of
is
it,
basically like hazing, right?
yeah.
It's basically hazing, but in Splatoon competitive, where you're just going through hell for a few weeks
Yeah.
with each other, and at the end you're like, "Well, that was awful, but at least we bonded."
Yeah, exactly. You make new connections, and then also that leads to potentially, finding out players who may be like, hey, you know what? I'm doing pickup with these other people I usually do. Do you want to join with me? Because we went to hell together. We have some kind of bond now.
Yeah, but yeah, take care not to disband. And I think that disbanding thing is very reasonable. Um, I think it's also blown a little bit out of proportion though, just
Hmm.
exactly because LUTI gives you a list of teams that have disbanded in the past couple of weeks, right, or
Hmm.
the past months. But if you look at an average team, you know, how many teams really that are formed now will still exist in 6 months,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
How many of them? I would guess maybe about um 40 like 60-50% of them will actually still be a reasonable team in 6 months. And if
Hmm.
you compare that to LUTI, which lasts for 8 months, 8 weeks, which is 2 months, which is a third of that, I don't think it's weird that 10 or 15% of teams disband during LUTI, because that's just about the average rate at which teams disband. And of course you might have the thing where teams disband right after LUTI, after they'll be waiting to play through the season. It's of course a bit of tension, but it can also form good teams. So it's like diamonds, right? You have to apply some pressure, and then sometimes you get an exploding heap of coal, and sometimes you get a diamond.
Yeah.
But it's still going to be worth it for those cases.
No, that's a really good analogy, actually. I like that one.
I just came up with it. I didn't know where it came from, but I'm happy with it.
That's exactly how it feels, though. It's like you never like teams can just when it comes to LUTI, you either gonna get some amazing truly shining and fan favorites, or you'll get those teams that just unfortunately just don't make it to the end, or right when they do, it's like we're gonna go our separate ways after, you know, after trying everything, and maybe it just doesn't work well, or maybe it did work well, but they see themselves with different goals.
Yeah, those exist very frequently as well. And sometimes, even if one or two people on a team disband, leave the team, then they'll find, but the three remaining players might still be able to find a team, and you'll still get a good call.
Hmm.
Which are also stories that appear very frequently. So I think overall, it's still a very. I think it's a net positive on team building, but don't quote me on this. Maybe someone else can be very angry at me that I'm saying this.
That's the fun of LUTI, right? Gotta try building your teams up. Try to for some teams that have been around before, like the current LUTI season, or maybe have been around some along because we have some teams in the community that've been around for ages. So there's always those teams that have new talents coming in with them, and they realize that maybe they're the right fit or that they're not. It's almost like sometimes LUTI is a great way of a tryout process.
Yeah, and indeed, there are just teams that have. It's so weird that there are certain teams that seem to come back just for Looty every single time.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if there's other tournaments as well. If there's specific people that will always. I mean, certain tournaments have this sort of specialty about them, right? Like the Girls Duo Cup, for example, is one of those things where some people really like that environment. Some women or non-binary people might really like that environment, and they try and play that specifically because they like interacting with similar people of similar backgrounds, right?
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure why I'm saying backgrounds when I'm talking about women in this case, but you get the point. But
Yeah.
the same thing is maybe the case for LUTI, right? Where people might um, come back time and time again just for LUTI and play not that much else, just because they like the entire system of it and they like the process and it's sort of a thing where they're like, oh, it's like a reunion when you get to high school and
Oh
you see the same
yeah.
people again.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a high school reunion that happens every 6 months.
LUTI is the high school reunion of the community. Oh man. So
Oh,
speaking
it's
of
been
LUTI, like how do you figure out the best times to have LUTI? Is it like based on like I guess TO availability? Is it maybe just time of year? Because I know LUTI's been throughout a different couple of times a years.
Yeah, I have this mathematical model working in the background that calculates for different times the amount of people that might be online on
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's basically just whenever I feel like I have the time, really.
Yeah, that's fair.
We have the staff time is a little bit, I mean, I'm not saying thin because we have some amazing people on right now, which are really helping me a lot. Um, but as I said, I just graduated with like a master's in pure mathematics,
Mm-hmm.
so that took a lot of time off me in
Yeah.
these months when I'm writing my thesis and I'm going sort of doing certain things for certain companies and then writing my thesis on the side. And I'm like, the first few weeks are really the most crucial, right? Because the first weeks are you have to set everything up, you have to reach out to all the people. You have to do all the seeding, which is a massive amount of work.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to do a lot of. I mean, some processes are automated, but a lot of things are also not. So really, you need the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks. There's this period where you just need everyone online.
Yeah.
And if I'm in the middle of writing a thesis, I can't be online for more than a day or two during those few weeks, or maybe a weekend. So this season honestly was just sort of the week after I finished my thesis. I was like, okay, let's just try and start up something with LUTI now after I got my diploma. And the same might sort of hold for other staff members where after holding a season for a few months, they're like, oh, I just need a break. And then after a break of 2 months, we're like, well, maybe we should start humping up again. Right? I
Yeah,
think
no,
we aim to
absolutely.
do something, aim to do about two a year. Um, I think we've done 15 seasons in 7.5 years now, so that would make two a year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at the start it was like more like every 5 months, and now we've had breaks where it's like 7 months between starts. Um, it's it's basically when we have the time, right?
Yeah.
I think for the next season of LUTI, I'm just gonna see when I can get time off work during like sort of because it's now early June, so the
Mm-hmm.
next season would start around November. Maybe would announce the next one. So I'll just see when in November I can get a few weeks of work or a week of work, and then I'll do everything in that week.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That'll
Yeah.
probably be the indication of when the next Luty is starting, and when can I get time of work when it's tiny, right?
Yeah.
And if you're my boss, you can give me nice free time. If you're my boss and you like playing in Luty, give me time off. And otherwise, you'll have to wait for me to get more time off. And the same goes for other staff members, right? Sometimes we have to accommodate, and I need to make sure that there's multiple people online. And if someone's on a holiday for like a few weeks, I
Mm-hmm.
won't start it in that week, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that's mostly just how it comes to be. It's whenever we have time, whenever we feel like we had enough of a break in between seasons that we can do another one, and we can spend another few weeks on landing everything and dealing with help desk and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because, I think I know everyone like there's always been those questions around the community where people wonder like, oh, when's the next Ludi gonna be? Oh, it's been X amount of time. Like, so I know the biggest one that I always see is like the timing of how long like a division from Ludi like technically matters. And that always
Yeah.
varies per person.
About 2 days.
Yeah, 2 days after, and then a team that's in like Division 4 will enter in a tournament, and next thing you
Yeah.
know, they beat Division 1 players. So then it's like, what happened here? But it's cool. It's cool to know that like as most tournaments are, it's nice to see this is the same way. It's when you have time, and that's how it should be. It shouldn't be that you're trying to force it to have a very consistent scheduling because unlike the real in the real
Mhm.
world there is no consistencies. You know what I mean? You're gonna have times where you'll be
Mhm.
available, and there's gonna be times you won't be. And it's good to find a time where most of like staff that you'll have will be available to help run a successful season.
I definitely think it's a fair point, by the way, because I think of all the things that LUTI is right now, maybe our biggest sort of the biggest gripe that people might have with it is the sort of timing where people might really like LUTI, but
Hmm.
then only hear of it like a month in advance, because that's realistically usually when we really start doing things, just a month before we're like starting to put everything up. So we also can't really announce it more than like a few weeks in advance or a month in advance, because that's when we know that we have the time and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Because it really does take a lot of time. But I think it's a very fair criticism where a lot of people, I think um, a couple streamers have notified me of this and were like, "Oh, I'd love to play in Luti, but you only give me well, like it's 4 weeks of notice, and now I can't get time of work." And I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry, I only have like a couple weeks to take off work as well." So I sort of
Yeah.
have the same issue, right?
Yep. It goes both
But it's
ways.
it's yeah, it goes both ways, but also, you could, also, I think this is maybe what we should be doing next season is to just announce 2 months in advance. Like, at least this is sort of the week where it will sort of happen, right? Or at
Yeah.
least give a better indication. Because now only indication is basically about 6 months after the previous one started, the next one's going to start. That's
Hmm.
your indication now, which is a reasonable indication, right? But you're not, you know, it still might be off by a couple of weeks. So if you're building a team and then you're doing tryouts, you'd like to maybe know if you have, 2 weeks or 5 weeks to do it. So
Yeah.
I we'll try and do that better. I'll try and do that better as a TO.
And that's I think that's really cool that um it's they aiming towards the process of a sooner announcement date. But again, it's like completely reasonable that sometimes you can't give as early as some people would prefer. Like I totally get the perspective of I'd love a consistency of a league, but then there's also the timing of like we're not like other games, right? We don't have a lot more of those consistencies where we're able to like have same staff available, maybe like player availability, or even just time of year availability. It can change drastically throughout the time. So, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like with a grain of salt. It'll be announced when it can be, but the expectation of we should have like a super long time to figure it out should be like less pressured.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll announce it when I can, and I'll try to do it better. But I can't give a definitive guarantee, especially with having to get time off work and that sort of thing. I think I should be able to do it in advance, but
Mhm.
Um, if I have to give another person a different time off, then I think they get priority.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, real life comes first. Splatoon is secondary to everything. Although for some people, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I mean, I think Splatoon has a decent community though. I've
Hmm.
definitely also been um, to other communities that are maybe slightly darker, of people that don't really tend to shower and don't really tend to
Hmm.
have much else of a life. I mean, I've never been a World of Warcraft player, but I've noted that it was particularly bad there. Um, I'm not referring to any South Park episodes, but it's there's definitely episode or definitely regions and games where
Yeah.
it's a lot worse than Splatoon. I think most people in Splatoon do have a daily life next to it, but it's also just less of a hardcore game, right? I think most people
Yeah.
get tired after a few hours of solo queue or whatever, right? And it's not maybe also that's why Nintendo doesn't really hard code that many competitive things into the game, because they're like, well, we're fine if people just play it for a couple hours a day, and we don't want any news stories of people sleeping in their own urine or whatever, trying to play the game to
Yeah, yeah.
fruition. So we're good here, I think.
Yeah, we have a really nice community and we have a really great built system for just how like the community is overall. So it's nice to be kind of like the odd one out in the competitive world.
Or the only one that's not odd one out. Like everyone else is the odd one out, and we're the only
Oh
normal
yeah,
ones.
we're the normal ones. Everyone else is it's on a different spectrum there when it comes to the cleanliness even. So, what would you say your favorite part of LUTI is? So you run it since you said you've been like helping run it since the season two, and out of pretty much what is that? That's like 13, 14 seasons. What would you say like your favorite part about like helping run or running LUTI is?
Um, I really like how it's community focused,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that that's not what everyone likes because there's definitely also people that really like this sort of high-end competitive game with the top four teams in the world that are sort of streamed and that's made massive production value and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What I really like about Luti is that anyone who plays the game sort of knows it and sort of maybe have played it with it in it in like a season or two. And I think there's very few people that really hate Luti that are like, oh, I really didn't like Luti. And not everyone will like massively enjoy it and there's great with it and it's an entirely different experience. And I think there are so many people that just enjoy the general thing of it and have fun games and that sort of thing that um this is just a skill and an experience that you can't get for the other tournaments. Um, and this is something that I've seen as well whenever I'm reading, and I'm not an active Twitter person at all. I'm not an active Discord person at all. Every single season, I'm telling myself, oh, I need to post stuff on Twitter, and then I post 4 meme images, and then I forget about it for the next 5 weeks. But occasionally, you at least try and read Twitter, and most people at least are not writing negatively about it, right? Most Discord messages, almost all of them nowadays, because that's also sort of shifted. I think about 5 years ago, I think people used to be a lot rougher and a lot meaner online than they are nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
especially on Discord. Um, I mean, you can go on 4chan and still have your daily dose of hate or whatever, but on these sort of platforms that I'm hosting on, people are generally very kind and generally at least indicate the things that I like, and they tell me, oh, I really like this aspect of it, or I really liked playing in this season or whatever. And there seem to be few people that really bash Luti the way that some other tournaments or some other TOs are really doing. And that tells me that at least we're doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
Especially with how many teams there are. Because I mean, even if we get, the same hate as a different tournament, if we have 10 times the amount of people playing, that means, per player, we have 90% less people complaining about it. So that's still very good, in my opinion. And I think most of the feedback has been pretty positive, and people like the things that we do, and people like the things that we add. And of course, everything could be better, and always things could be better. But I think the most enjoyment I just get out of having, thousands of people enjoy the thing that you're doing, and sometimes also a message is nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like one of the better, like the clear indications that you're doing something right is when you have haters. I think that's like the best indication you could possibly have. If there's like, I know that's like always like that was always the biggest rule with YouTube. Is like if you get a couple dislikes, keep going because that means you're doing it right.
And we need to clickbait more, though. I think if we clickbait more, I think we'll be better. If I get some YouTube shorts out with some Splatoon tournaments, I think we can shatter the entrance record next time. I think if we get to be the next major internet sensation on YouTube, we'll
Hmm.
definitely improve. But for now, well, I'm not really I'm not really dislike baiting yet. We should try and improve on that.
Yeah,
Rage
absolutely.
baiting always works best.
Yeah, I think a Ludi like funny shorts would be honestly really incredible. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what to put in it, to be honest. I think tournament highlights would be the most logical thing, or like something joking with divisions, but it's hard when you're a tournament, right?
Yeah, yeah. Look, what's the best way we can goof off with it? That I guess that's something to
Oh,
bring up at
this
the next
division, what
staff
team just
meeting.
this Division One team just crushed their opponents using a very weird weapon that nobody thought would be good, and then like knockout or something. It's really
Yeah.
nice. That's too bad.
Taking notes for the next staff meeting. You got this. You got this. I believe. So, speaking of like, of course, more about LUTI, what is one of the most challenging parts? Now, I know you mentioned, of course, like probably one of the most biggest is, of course, figuring out when to have it. But besides maybe like finding the right timing for it, what else might be a really like hard challenge when it comes to having LUTI or helping run LUTI?
I think the main barrier to hosting these leagues and why others haven't been so successful and maybe have broken down is that the seeding can be really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And we're working towards making that better. And I think, I mean, back in the day, in like seasons, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to say, oh, I did it
Yeah,
all by
but like a
myself, and
rough
then someone else
area.
did mostly. But sort of in this general area, I think I've done most of the seeding where I basically knew every team and I just put them in and I had people help me. And then we transitioned to more of a seeding council where um, people who started to know much more about me and started hosting their own tournaments, like the Lowings, like the LSLs, like the weeklies, like whatever WUG is doing, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. They they started to know a lot more about teams than I did, and then we had people coming in. Um, I think Lugi is basically the only tournament that can allow itself to get other people that are doing this for me. Because if I had to do it myself, it would take a month probably,
Mm-hmm.
and that would just not be feasible because then half the teams would be disbanded by that time.
Yeah.
So this is basically the only way you can do it is by getting 10 very influential, knowledgeable people that know a lot of teams in with us and helping us. Because if they weren't there, I don't know if there would be Luti nowadays, honestly, with the amount of teams that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is probably the main barrier of entry for other teams, and this is going to be basically the hardest part of it. And nowadays we are um, discussing or trying to make certain adjustments to this where you can use something like send out power or elo ratings or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've worked with that as well quite significantly, but it's sort of hard to do that um, because for elo ratings you need a lot of data and you need a lot of web scraping and there's a lot of different websites, and honestly it's sort of hard to find Splatoon tournaments online because there's a lot of different weird tournament websites and a lot of different things, and some teams might only have played in a couple tournaments and then their elo rating is based off 4 matches against teams that we've never heard of, which is a lot of what you're doing in LUTI, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard to make this process standardized and make it take a lot less time. And there's been efforts to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things that were integrated with the Sender website do have this sort of option where you can already have a base for every team. And then of course you'll need to manually change a lot of teams because it'll be wrong a lot of the time. But at least you have a general ranking of it, right?
Yeah.
And um, this is just honestly the main barrier and also the main time consuming thing for Luti. Because honestly, putting up a bracket is not that much work.
Mm-hmm.
Putting the teams in challenge is not that much work. Lean has done a lot of work with the bots, which means that filling in scores isn't that much work. Help desk is doable. It can be sometimes there's a lot of people asking, but it's not, day to day, it's not that much work. It's reading this entire um making sure that every team is in a division and is in placed in the right way and is not like very misplaced and has a good group and has a good region and that sort of thing. That's honestly the main point, and that's taking a lot of time and the most difficult part of Luti.
Yeah.
And I think if that wasn't the case, I think a lot more types of these sorts of tournaments could be put up, but you need a team and you need knowledge, very significant amount to be able to host this. And that makes it quite difficult.
Yeah, and I imagine having because I just thought of it, it just came into my head now. Having people on help with the seating council that maybe help around the community a lot more and know a lot more people or seeing a lot of like players go from either team to team or become team to free agent. I imagine that helps when it comes to having to see a team that's like a pickup for Ludi, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also hard to see them because especially pickups, you never know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And we've had it very frequently where a pickup just either wins a division or goes 0-5 because they're the hardest to place.
Hmm.
Um, I think generally people tend to underseed pickups and usually more person focused. And maybe this is also why my seedings have been bad, but I feel like putting four good people on a team will generally give a pretty good team. And it's rare that they really don't mix and match.
Hmm.
Of course, it can happen, but um, I think a lot of seeders they find results more important. So you'll see a lot of teams that are pick up like, or maybe that are two part of a team, and then two that are just picked up for LUTI, that sort of thing. Um, they're put maybe a division lower, or maybe sometimes even two divisions lower because they just don't have any results as a team.
Yeah.
Whereas I would feel more like, oh, they probably are good enough, and even if they don't have results, right?
Hmm.
But that's also, I think, a change in seeding that's occurred over the last, and with this entire thing of having to standardize processes and spend less time on seeding, that sort of thing. It's much easier to look at results and to just say, well, if you wanted a higher seed, you should have just had a result, and that's very fair, right?
Yeah.
That's a very fair opinion to have, and a lot of seeding council members basically go with this now, where they're like, well, you could have just played in a couple tournaments and proven yourself, and you didn't, so it's your own fault, right? And that's very reasonable, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. Um, but that might cause some of them to be sometimes underseeded a little bit, but yeah, that's just different opinions on the seeding process and uh,
Yeah. And I think those are two
different than
reasonable
I made of
ways. Yeah. Those are definitely two reasonable ways of looking at it too. And I mean, I think the community kind of um silently agreed that the best way that you're gonna get seeded higher divisions is having those results, and that's how it works even when you're like a free agent looking for teams. As someone who's been, on and off teams throughout, my entire career in the competitive scene, one of those things is like that's a lot of teams look for is those results. How many podium placements do you have? What's the highest you've gotten in certain tournaments? Depending on the team, how high you
Mhm.
get, that's what they're kind of looking for. So, it's become kind of like that silent agreement that that's what like teams aims look for in the scene. So, but it is also nice to know that like there is that other like potential thought of like, well, these players are known to be pretty good. You don't want to see them too low because they could just sweep the entire bracket, and it's like, well, then you're gonna get people complaining like, hey,
Mhm.
why are they in our bracket or our division?
Yeah, I
Kind of like
think
a
this
double-edged
season's
sword.
also had, I think, a few teams that have basically these exact same thing.
Hmm.
I think there was Viscous, which was like in Conton as well. And I think the seeding council did seed Conton into Division One because they were like, yeah, it's Conton, you can't not put them in Division One. And they were like, no, please don't seed us too high because we're just having fun, we're washed and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's a couple of these teams that have maybe, sometimes a player that has done really well in season one of LUTI, 6 years ago in Splatoon 1. And then they're like, well, I guess this person's probably good, but they haven't played in a tournament for 6 years. So, what can we do? And this is a lot of what LUTI is attracting as well. It's just anyone and anything that's just coming into the scene. They're like, well, let's just play a LUTI together. Why not?
Yeah.
And suddenly you have this team where you just really don't know where to place them. And you can't possibly place them in like a Division 8 or something because a way to get for that. But in terms of results, maybe, you sort of have to. So those are definitely discussions to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always those talks that like there's those players out there, right, that are like so good in like playing X rank but they play it casually,
Yeah.
right? They're not like competitive driven, but they play X rank because they're for fun, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm like a 3K X power. It's like, how are you not in the competitive scene? And then they'll dabble in it, and next thing you know, they win the next SOS or Proving Grounds, whatever it
Yeah.
might be. So there's always that thought behind it that like this is a player that maybe hasn't played in X amount of time. It's like, but for all we know, they've been playing solo queue every day from since then, and they're still really good. You never know.
Yeah, I think wasn't there a Division X team which is basically I had this exact same thought as you had. I think it's the team with like Reyes on it and a couple other people were like. I mean, I haven't actually had an Splatoon online account now for like half a year because I I was writing my thesis. But
Yeah.
back in like 6 months ago, I was playing solo queue, and every single time I went online, there were like a couple people that had the that I saw every single time, and I never saw them in tournaments. I was like, who are these people? And I think they indeed just played a couple tournaments, and usually they form together because nobody else wants them because they haven't had any results, they haven't played any tournaments, so they're
Hmm.
like, well, let's just band together and play a couple tournaments. I think Dot Gang is honestly sort of the same, where these are also solo queue warriors that were very good and they just formed together, and then suddenly they play in tournaments and suddenly they're really good. It's really hard to place these people, and you never know. And sometimes, exactly as you say, these solo queue warriors that get 3k X power using Splusiomatic and don't paint but do stellar kills. When you're
Yeah.
playing in a team where everyone just focuses on kills and nobody paints, and they're like, oh, we're just shut down really hard by anyone who throws a splash wall at the right moment, right?
Yep.
But at other times, it does work really well, and maybe they adjust slightly, and suddenly they're a very solid team of people that haven't played in any tournaments before, but suddenly do really well. And I always like seeing those teams. I'm not sure if I root for them because they're still solo queue warriors, but I like seeing them.
Yeah, they're the wild cards when it comes to teams in LUTI and maybe even tournaments in general. Because yeah, you never know how they're gonna do. I mean, I think that's the fun part is like teams that players will even underestimate themselves. They'll see a team, it's like, oh, I don't know any of these guys. Oh, they have no results. We'll sweep them, and then they get like 0-3, and it's like, who are you?
Yeah, and then it's up to us to place them in the division, and everyone will be angry because everyone's like, "Oh, they don't have results, but they're way too good.
Yeah,
Don't please anyone."
exactly. And that's when like there you have the whole oh, I bet they're what's it called? Oh, I'm forgetting it. Smurfing. That's it. Yeah, the smurfing allegation. I bet their top players are just smurfing under different names.
Yeah, there are always going to be people like that, but honestly, I don't think it's been that bad. I don't think we've really had ever like a team that's really smurfed and then won a division or did really well.
Hmm.
I think it's generally sort of pointless anyway, and then you get found out, and it, there's a couple people who do the exact same thing, and that they're always found out, and then their teammates get banned as well, and they're like, well, I guess I'll. Somehow they always try again in like 2 months, and they always get found out. I think usually there's not really a point to it generally.
Yeah. So Ludi already is incredibly successful, right? Do you have any
Mhm.
more goals for Ludi to achieve?
Um, at this point, it's going to be really hard to think of a goal, right? Because
Yeah.
my experience or my point of view has always been that things like prize money is not that important for a tournament. I don't want the tournament the highest prize money. I'd rather have a tournament with 600 teams all have a good time than one team winning on the most money or whatever.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's different tournaments for different people, right? I'm not saying that those tournaments are was epically or whatever. It's always good to try and get those up, but maybe they're for different types of TOs than I would be.
Yeah,
So honestly, I can't say that we need to be the biggest tournament because we already are by a couple hundred people. Um, Maybe my goal would be to get rid of it at some point, that I can spend other things in my life.
that's fair. That's valid.
That I can be a fly on the wall and just interact with it a little bit. Um, no, but I'm honestly happy with where we are, and we do get. I think maybe getting the entire process automated a bit more, streamlined a bit more would be good. Um, to give us all a better time, and to maybe, ideally, in a world, maybe you would have a sort of automated process where teams could just sign up on a website and they would almost automatically be placed in the division and place against people, and then they could choose how long it lasts, and they could be like, oh, we want to play in the full LUTI for 2 months, or we want to just play in a fluty for like a week or something.
Hmm.
And um, I think there are definitely improvements to be made. I think in terms of entrance numbers, we can't really put any more goals.
Yeah.
My goal would be to have less than 300 teams next time, so we so we can sort of oversee it a bit easier. But I think we've shattered every goal in that sense. But I think the experience could still be improved by
Hmm.
having more tournaments, by having. I think Flutie is something that has seen a lot of positive response from people that a lot of people like. So maybe you could do something like that, but automatically. Um, in this sort of world where cars are flying in midair and all the air is green and there are trees
Yeah.
everywhere, the everything would be integrated with Sendao and everyone would play and everyone would be happy. But it's hard to see exactly how much of that Nintendo is okay with and how
Mhm.
much of that is feasible and people actually like.
Yeah, no, no, that makes sense. And I mean, I knew like it was gonna be definitely a tricky question when I was thinking it up because I mean it's so hard to when like Ludi's kind of achieved everything you could think of, right? It's been the like pretty much one of the longest running events. It's achieved record-breaking numbers that we've ever seen for any kind of competition in Splatoon. I mean, it's hard to think of something to add on top of that besides maybe just becoming now like just a staple in the community, which again it already is. So
Like everyone in the universe has to play in LUTI. That's going to be my
yeah,
goal. We need 6 billion entrants for the next season. No, but honestly, it's funny every time because, of course, we also have to deal with um, these licenses from Nintendo and that sort of thing.
yeah.
And I have a Nintendo contact, and it's just funny every time where I'm like, I contact them, and I'm like, oh, I want to host a tournament. Um, is it larger than 50 entrants? Yes.
By like
Maybe a
10
little bit.
times.
By like 100 times. Yeah, exactly. And like 5,000. Why are you having four thousand entrants? Why are you putting a 4,000 entrance cap? And then I have to explain like, oh, this is the amount of divisions and this is the amount of teams. And they're like, oh, maybe we can make it a region-based tournament. And then I'm like, we have like 2,000 people from the United States and they're in mixed teams playing against Mexico. And they're like, wow, whatever, forget it. It's fine. We don't care anymore. This is basically how it goes. Mm.
Yeah, I imagine that that's a fun conversation to have every time. Oh my gosh. So does actually that's actually a good question. Does Looney need a Nintendo license to run?
Well, we sort of technically do,
Technically, right?
but we have good contacts with the people with sort of the Nintendo because I've played and won two Dutch championships, so I
Yeah.
already know sort of the people from Nintendo that are hosting this, and so I have direct contact with them. Um, Generally, yes, but it's really hard to get a license
Yeah.
because licenses are usually region based, and so if you want, this is literally what they told me. Nintendo of Europe can't give me a license because there's 2,000 people from the United States playing,
Hmm.
and the Nintendo of the United States people can't give me a license because there's the same amount of Europeans playing.
Yeah.
Um, so they're like, they can't really give me a license when they don't know the exact distribution of teams, and they'd like to put me in a specific region or whatever, but they can't. I mean, I'm Dutch, so they could. I'm going to Nintendo of Europe, but sort of the teams being mixed and that sort of thing makes it quite hard.
Yeah.
Um, so at this point, basically, they're like, I think the Nintendo of Europe people are less um, strict about this sort of thing than Nintendo of Japan.
Hmm.
And also, the Splatoon people are less strict about it than some other tournaments like Smash,
Yeah.
because the licenses really were for the sort of slippy melee tournament type things, or the tournaments with the massive like Genesis and that sort of thing, where there's a lot of people in a stadium and there's prize pools and there's people that rage quit or whatever, and then
Yeah.
um, that's really what the licenses were for. So go when I come to them with a grassroots tournament, I mean, I'm not sure if there's even grassroots, but in principle, a grassroots tournament that you know does break the entrance cap by like 3,000, but what and break the regions cap and whatever, they'll be like, yeah, okay, we can't give you a license, but I won't like call Nintendo HQ on you. You'll be fine as long as you don't like make it a price pool worth a significant amount or anything,
Yeah,
right?
which is fair.
Yeah. And this also sort of gives me sort of a reason not to run a prize pool anymore.
Hmm.
It's sort of been a little bit pointless anyway, because um, yeah, I mean, back in the day, I used to care maybe more about exactly the type of teams that would join. In this case, if Um, if Win doesn't join because we don't have a prize pool, I'll be like, yeah, whatever. We have like a bunch of other teams that can take
Yeah.
their spot, and then it'll be all right. I want to make a good experience for everyone. I don't particularly mind. I mean, I'd love anyone to join, of course. I'm not saying they're too good for us or whatever, or we're too good for them. I don't mean that at all. I think it's just that I don't have a particular care for any teams joining us anymore. So I think this sort of Nintendo license thing was a good reason to say, okay, we just are not allowed to give out prize balls anymore
Yeah.
because I want to stay friends with the people at Nintendo. So we'll just do it like this, and we just say to Nintendo, "Oh, yeah, okay, we're hosting this tournament of 3,000, 4,000 people. Will you care that much about it?" And I'll be like, "No, okay, it's fine."
Yeah, I think that's good to know, especially because like I imagine everyone when the whole license first came out was worried about their weeklies, their monthlies, but I don't personally recall anyone ever thinking about what about LUTI, and I think like I feel like that was kind of like that's like the dark horse in the community where it's like this is an event that I feel like no one's ever questioned because it's rare, but also you have a lot of these interesting and intricate like factors to lose than you do other tournaments. So
Yeah.
it's kind of good to know that Luti's safe as well as everything else is. Especially with like just the way it's run, the kind of entrance that we have um, from Nintendo.
Yeah, LUTI is definitely the one tournament that would break every single rule in these
Yeah.
tournaments based on entry cap, but also regions and essentially everything. The length is also weird. The amount of sort of you could call every division a different tournament, in which case you need like 12 licenses,
Yeah.
you know. And there's been, we've talked about it as well in the past, where we're like, well, if we have to get a license, what do we have to do? Let's say we have an entrant cap of, you know, 50 from Nintendo, right? We could just make, 12 divisions, each with 48,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll just make like 13 different tournaments and then say, well, no, this is not the same tournament. These 13 individual divisions are not related to each other. They're just tournaments that we host. They don't have any relation with each other.
Yeah.
And we'll try and get them to buy it or something. Right. There are definitely options, but I'm happy that we don't really have to go through any loops and they'll be fine with whatever we put out.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun part about it, and that's the enjoyable part is that no matter what happens, like it's safe. They're happy. We're happy. That's all you could ask for when it comes to running this kind of event.
I'm just happy we're able to do it.
Yeah. So I gotta ask, and I gotta know: did you personally fill out the Ludi bracket, the fantasy bracket?
The fantasy bracket. I have not yet, but
Ooh,
I will. I
let's
really will.
go.
Mm, I do it every year because I do want, and I think in the first seasons I don't want to win it because I sort of don't want to,
Yeah.
put in like, but um, yeah, I filled it out every season. I think in the early seasons I was better when I knew more teams
Mm-hmm.
and I knew the scene, and I was like, I was disagreeing with seating council members on certain teams, and I was like, nah, this doesn't. They're way too good for this division. But then majority holds, and then I'm doing pretty well of these teams.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I sort of encouraged the seating council and everyone to do it as well, just to have someone to compare yourself to, right? And that's also sort of fun when you're like, oh, I did better than like three Luty staff members, so okay,
Yeah.
good. It's a fun, and I'm willing to be that Luty staff member that sits, not in the top five anymore like I used to, but like in place 105 or whatever, and just being seeing where the teams end up. But I also want to. I think the fantasy bracket is also very nice because it gives stories a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
It indicates to us also which teams are perceived to be good, which people perceive to try and win divisions. So it's also an indication of, oh, did we maybe underseed this team or overseed this team, depending on if they get a lot of votes. Um, and I just like how it creates stories and that sort of thing. So it doesn't cost anything, right? It's not like it just goes into the automatic formula and it spits out a score. So it's not like I have to do extra work by
Yeah.
filling out a bracket. So I always like doing it. I do have to be careful that I don't pick because there's a few bonus questions to which I sort of know the answer and nobody else
Oh yeah,
does.
yeah.
So I usually give myself like if there's like a 20-point question and there's four possible answers, I will give myself like 5 points to say, oh, I just give myself like the average expected score or whatever.
Hmm.
And then I think that's a reasonable compromise. But it's, someone else might be mad at me for this, but this is, I think, sort of a reasonable compromise. Or I just give myself 0 points if it's a very hard question or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's and those bonus points aren't worth that much anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, I do like doing it. I like comparing myself to others. I like seeing myself slip down the ranks over the years with how much worse I am. I like seeing the same people that right to the top every time. It's also usually the people that are most interested in LUTI or that you see a lot in general and that sort of thing. They like doing it a lot. Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely been a positive thing that um, takes a fair amount of time, but also gives a lot more interaction, and it's one of those community things that I think people like about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, you also get a lot of those. I know there's a team I coach, and one of the players on there does a lot of like fantasy football brackets. So when they found out there was a
Mhm.
Ludi one, they were so excited, and I'm just like, you get these players like that that see it, they're drawn to fantasy brackets, and they any shot they get, they want to play in it. And I think it's really cool. I think it's a really fun addition. I think it gives people, a little more, you know, uh, additive to Ludi
Big
besides playing in it.
connection to some of the teams, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes
A
people like have
reason to
to.
root for them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Root for certain teams, or even like do research on teams. Like, oh, like Division Two, like a Division like five player maybe doesn't know a lot of Division Two players, so they'll see the teams and then look them up, and then they'll find their favorite throughout the bunch, and next thing you know, they're keeping track of a whole different bracket that's their own.
Mhm. Yeah. I could advance it as well. I could make different groups or whatever. I honestly, I took the idea from Get Kraken, which was sort of a sister team on the bounce back in the day. Honestly, I'm talking like no, I'm like an old man, and nobody will know what I'm talking
Back
about.
in my
But there
day.
was this team back in my day, back when we're still young, um, there was a sister team called Kraken, and they always do used to do this with LUTI, where they each picked out a team from. Of course, there were fewer teams back then, so they
Yeah.
sort of handed them out. They were like, oh, "I get this team, and you get this team," and then they sort of battled against each other, and it was fun. And I took part of their idea basically and just made it into LUTI, but um, yeah, I like the addition as well, and I think it's cute. It could be any better by being able to make groups and that sort of thing. That may be something for the future,
Hmm.
because that's also what people like doing. If they sort of like comparing to each other, and then like everyone on that team will fill in a different bracket, and they'll see who does the best. That sort of thing. Um, but also, I see a lot of people that pick all the same teams. There'll be like three people, and they'll fill in the fantasy bracket together, and they'll fill in all the same teams. And I'm like, that just means they all get the same score. I don't really
Oh
understand.
yeah. That's true. Yeah, teams will be like, "Oh, let's all be let's all fill this out." And then it's like, "Well, how do we get the same score?" It's like, "Well, if you think about what you answered."
Sometimes they'll do one different. I think there was one question this time in the fantasy bracket in the bonus questions, which was like, um, pick a split between three weapon,
Oh,
and if someone
yes.
else picked the same weapon, you don't get any points. And they filled in all the same, but the weapons were different. But of course that makes sense because you wouldn't all want to fill in the same weapon because then of course you all get no points because you
Yeah.
picked the same one. Like by definition of the question, you can't do that. So they might still get different scores based on if they answered that question or whatever. But um, yeah, it's still funny to see.
Do you think anyone's gonna get any points from that question?
I think so because um, there are sort of the same order of magnitude of weapons as there are people filling out the bracket. I
Okay.
think there's like, and I don't want to give out too many hints about this question, but some people have, um, and I might be ruining the entire integrity of the question, but some, and it's not like 7,000 people are going to watch this anyway, right? So, but some weapons are also, you know, they might not be the weapons, there are some weapons that are not just like main weapons, but also, you can also maybe classify. So I think there's over 100 weapons in the game,
Hmm.
and then some that you sort of might classify as a weapon. Um, and there are also maybe only about 150 to 200 people who fill out the bracket. So
Yeah.
in principle, basically almost anyone can fill out a unique weapon. Um, but I think this is sort of the perfect amount because um, yeah, you don't want 10 people who can all just pick a different weapon, but you also don't want 1,000 people who all pick a lot of the same weapons, right? So I think this is a good amount. I think I like the idea behind the question. I think it works
Yeah,
with the amount.
it makes people have to think now. And like I think that's the fun part about it too. Is like, like there's obviously weapons that almost anyone's gonna pick for. Like I love this type of question so much because it makes people think. Right? It's like what is like maybe a weapon no one really uses. Oh, I'll pick that. But then it's like, but if no one's probably gonna pick the most common weapon everyone's gonna pick, so I'm just gonna pick it because I'm sure no one will pick it. So you have that like
Exactly.
interesting mindset behind it. I love that.
Yeah, it's also I think I've also done, and I can do this, right? Because it's not the same question. I think I like introducing a game theory question every single time into the bracket just to see what people do.
Hmm.
I think there was a question in the past where like um and this isn't on the bracket, but this is a similar question to one I would use, but not exactly because it doesn't really fit. But
Yeah.
it was like, oh, pick a number between 1 and 10. If you pick the least common one, you get points or something. Pick the number that nobody else picks. And like 50% of people pick seven. And because they all think, oh, it's the weirdest number and nobody else will pick it.
Hmm.
But that's exactly the reason why everyone picks seven,
Yeah.
right? And and numbers like 5 and 10 and 1 are like, oh, nobody's gonna pick two because that's like a normal number, and five, those are too obvious. But those are the ones that nobody picks because that's like, oh, they think that, oh, that's too normal or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically the same thing in these brackets where you're like, yeah, you can pick, you know, the splatter shot because it's like the most common weapon in the game. But then is everyone going to pick that or is nobody going to pick that because everyone thinks they're going to pick it? I like it as well. Or you could pick like a weapon that has like three variants and then pick the most obscure variant and then the most obscure type of that variant and then add something weird. And it's like, well, yeah, but maybe everyone's going to do that. So I like it as well.
It really
But I'm
it
not
makes
gonna
to
I'm not
think.
gonna I'm not gonna say anything about which are actually picked, right? You're still
Yeah.
gonna have to think about it. At least not until Saturday.
Oh my gosh, I
But it
love
is
it.
funny.
So you've seen lots of teams come in and out of LUTI. Is there
Mhm.
one team name that's always stuck with you? Whether it was really funny of a name,
Yeah.
whether it
No,
was
sorry, the silence is not like, oh, I'm trying to ignore you. I'm just thinking. I'm generally most partial to um I think this is the funniest is when a team really goes all in on their team name and
Mhm.
they like make with their characters their names as well. These are the ones that I like the most. I think the most famous one is probably the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle team,
Oh yes.
which still which still nobody knows who they are, but they all had a name of a different turtle, and then maybe they subbed in Master Splinter at some point or something.
I
But there was
love
a couple teams like there was I think a Totally Spies team with like the Totally Spies. There was the Sailor Moon team, which all had like Sailor Moon and Sailor Jupiter and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I always like those teams, and I think they're the best. Even though the team name is not the most creative or whatever, but I like it when they go the extra distance and actually make that their in-game names. It's harder now because nowadays you have only like a limited amount of name changes or something, so you can't really, for just a tournament, take different names. You're usually
Yeah.
stuck with it for a while. But that's also why I think it's the best now is if they make an entire team based on this one thing, right? Um, and you could make your team name a pun, right? I also like those, but it's very rare that you have a team name that's both a pun that's very funny and also you came up with it yourself, right? I think most people just come up with it from the internet or they read it. Like I like, squid fried rice or something, I like that joke.
Yeah.
But it's so I still like the team name, but it's not like they came up with it themselves, right? So I like maybe the Totally Spies or that Sailor Moon team is a bit more because it even though, obviously you don't come up with the team name Sailor Moon because it's a thing,
Mm.
but that's also the point of it, right? So I like this sort of entire package. I also always like those teams. And I think there's a too few teams that take a theme and that all. I think people should do that more. I like that.
Yeah, more theme team names. That'd be fun. And then of course
Yeah.
change their names to it too, so it makes more sense.
We
Oh my
want
god.
more team.
Are there any funny moments that you could think of that have happened, whether it was setting up Ludi or during a season that you can remember?
The funniest thing usually comes from help desk, with people
As
being,
always.
um, yeah. We don't like do a lot of games or whatever on the LUTI staff server. We don't like watch movies together or anything.
Mm,
Maybe I should do that, but we tend not to do that a lot. So the funny things that I see are mostly off, help desk. And I don't mean to uh, be rude to players because I know that, for a lot of players, this might be their first tournament or they may barely speak English or they
mm,
have these, weird personality traits which might make it hard for them to talk to other people. But unintentionally, these sorts of moments can stick with you and they can be really funny, right, for a long time.
yeah.
And honestly, even some of the more well-known people, when you look back at it, um, um, there's a very well-known streamer now. I'm not going to call them out, and they've improved a lot over the time. So I don't want to call out who it is. Um, but like when they played in their first tournament, and this was 7 years ago when they were a lot younger, and now they've grown up and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I think one of the first tournaments they played in, I was hosting, and they were playing on Flounder Heights, and their opponents used full dynamo rollers, and they pinged us on the staff server, and they were like, other opponents allowed to do this? Aren't they allowed to play with four dymos? That's not fair. I don't think it's fair. And we're like, well, your opponent picks four dynamos and still wins against you. I'm sorry.
That's
Um,
amazing.
there's people that ping us um, in the LUTI server as well, and they're like, and this was I think in Division 9 or Division 10 or something, and they pinged us and they were like, our opponents are all S rank, but we are all A rank. How is this fair? How are
Oh
we
my
matched against
gosh.
them? I'm like, well, we we couldn't find six other teams that were all A rank to play against you. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to play against some S ranks. And it's not like they were even S plus or X rank or anything. They was like a slightly higher rank, and they didn't
Yeah.
think it was fair. And yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't record the ranks of every team. Um, and of course, maybe I've mentioned this before, but there was also this guy who played in the Dutch Championships. But for
Hmm.
the Dutch Championships, you had like a prize pool.
Hmm.
So you had if you win the Dutch Championship, this was one I hosted it. You would win some trinkets, some plastic, knickknacks, and
Yeah.
flight to France, I think, or Germany, where the thing was being held, where the
Hmm.
championships were being held. And prior to the tournament, they were constantly in the help desk, and they were like, "This flight that I'm gonna win, is this flight like with EasyJet because I don't really like EasyJet. Can
Oh
we
my
maybe get a
gosh.
different airline that's like slightly more advanced, like Iceland Air? I really like that airliner. And they were having issues with the trinkets. They were like, "Oh, I don't really like having plastic in my house. Can we get something that's like maybe something with paper or maybe a poster or something?" And they were like very sure that they were going to win their prize, and they were already like saying that the prize wasn't good enough or that it wasn't what they liked or something. And of course, they were knocked out in the first round,
Oh my.
and they had no chance. They were just immediately ruined, but so
Oh
they
my
were. They had
god.
a lot. They had a lot of guts and moxie. And they're like, "Oh, this is not good enough a prize. I want a better prize." Um, yeah, you have a lot of people that are just a bit weird, but those types of moments, I think, are the funniest. And I'm sure that all of these people will look at this exact conversation in like 3 years, and they'll be like, you know, in that bed, and they're like, "Oh, I was such a fucking idiot for
Yeah.
saying this," and I was like, I've had that moment as well where like 15 years later, I'm like, "Oh, why did I say that?" And then nobody else remembers. But actually, in this case, I do remember, and I thought it was really funny. So
Yeah.
it's fair that you're thinking about it because I do remember.
But yeah, you're the person that everyone fears remembers something when they're like trying to
Yeah,
go to bed and the nightmares from their childhood come back.
yeah, that's me right here.
Oh my gosh. All right. So, do you have any advice for current or potential future players of LUTI?
That's a good question. I think the main thing is that um, LUTI, because it doesn't happen a lot, because you don't get a lot of matches, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a good opportunity. I think you should try and take the most out of it. Um, I think it's really good to indeed do two things: is A, um, try and practice with your team, try and take it sort of semi-seriously, right? I think that's if you want to improve, you know.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's fine. You can play whatever, and I'm not, you know. My advice could be do whatever you like. If you like, you know, just playing around with four cluches on a team and not really caring and just having fun, it's fine, right? You can do whatever you like. But if you want to try and improve and that sort of thing, I think taking these Looty stats seriously and planning out stuff with your team, practicing these maps, um, I think it's really good. And also to contact other teams in your division. You can set up a server with them. You can just form groups with them in DMs and chat. You can invite them to your own, you know, your own team servers. You can ping them on the Loti server and see if they want to play with you. But getting these sorts of groups growing is basically the ideal way of um, getting practice with similarly skilled teams, people in your position, people um, that you know, even if your team disbands, you know, two teams might disband, and then two people from each team might join together and form a new team, right? This is something that
Yeah.
happens very frequently, where you know maybe two teams are not um, as into trying to improve as others, and then maybe the 14 people that just want to like you know have fun and screw around will form a team, and the four people that try and improve form a team. And you can mix and match with teams, and but as long as you just sort of make a small community out of it, get in touch with each other, I think that's really good, and that's something that Luti can give you that very few other tournaments can do. Because you know, if you're out in you know the second round and it's sort of hard going to another team from the second round because you don't know, you know, who they played, how good they are. But for Luti, you know, you can sort of see, and I know that not every group is exactly as good. But, you know, if you're
Mm-hmm.
going 3-2 in your group, you can just ping the other teams that went, you know, 3-2 or 2-3 in your group. And you're like, oh, do you want to scrim? Or maybe a person in your group that you had a game 9 against or game 8, right? That sort of thing. It's a really good. It's probably the best opportunity that only comes around once every 6 months of getting in touch with other people um, of similar ideas and skill levels and fun that you are. So I think you should be doing that. Or it's a good option.
Yeah, and I mean during LUTI is honestly the most active the comp scene is for all teams, right? Because like the during post the LUTI seasons, you have of course teams that are trying to grind for tournament X, Y, and Z. But you know, day doesn't go by where there's at least some kind of ping for a scrim, and sometimes those aren't always filled up. But you know, taking advantage of the opportunity that you have upwards, like at least this season, 500 plus teams that are all playing at the same are trying to play around the same time. You know, it's gonna be hard not to find some kind of scrim that you can work out. So that's honestly like I think that's really amazing and solid advice that players should take advantage of. I mean that this is literally a once in a you know couple months type of thing that you know you get to form those kind of scrim bonds with other teams, and then that could lead to a lot more.
Yeah, and it's honestly very frequent that teams that start in Luti end up shooting all the way to the top, right? And you'll never see them again, and then suddenly they're like amazing, right?
Yeah.
And Luti is a great way to improve. And I've seen many, even you know, some Division X teams to some Division X plus teams in the past. They've started in Luti Division 4 and 5 or 6 and shot all the way up. So it's definitely possible as long as you put in a little bit of effort, which I mean, I enjoy doing that sort of thing, right? And I think others might as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Even like, I think there were a couple teams like right after last season that just shot up to like Div 1 when they were just winning low ink a couple months prior. So like a little bit of effort goes a long way, and you know, as long as you're all on the same page about it, you could really just shoot for the moon. And I think that's amazing to see that a lot of these teams are capable of doing that.
Yeah, I love seeing it, and I love seeing teams grow as well, and then meeting them later. It's so funny. Honestly, most extreme case might be Punchy, who, I mean, if I have to give a player shout out, I think he's playing in Division X now for
Hmm.
Golden Hour. And like 6 months ago, oh no, that was a year ago. I was holding the Belgian championships, and Bunchy was there, and he was like, I'd never heard of them. Like literally, I've never heard of the guy,
Hmm.
and he's on the team, and we're like, well, this might be an all right team, and they were sort of, there was a very clear favorite in that case. The team with I think the Belgian champion and the Belgian champs from last year, and they were very favored to win. And suddenly, this one dude, made a very good effort and almost beat them and had a very good match against them. I was like, wow, that's pretty good. And then a year later, they're basically on the same level. Um, but this is I think Crack and Paradise used to shoot up from the. It's just so often that it happens, and I really liked seeing it. So I'd love to see more teams do the same.
Yeah, just put in that effort and grind to the top because you never know. That's my favorite part. I love saying too, and that's something I like try to strive for in a lot of like my own advice when like players will ask me, or I've had a lot of players come up to me regards to like the videos I've made in the past regarding to getting into competitive is like, I always try to drive for like you never know. You could be the next world champ if you put in the effort. Because it really could be anybody. We've seen it time and time again, in different regions and across the world, like teams like no one's ever heard of are beating veterans that we expect to win the whole event. And it's like, who are you? And I need to know more about you.
Yeah, the world champs are getting disqualified anyway, right? So you might just be slotting in there.
Yeah, exactly. And then, who knows? Maybe I don't think we got a world. We're gonna get no world champ was announced for or like the qualifiers. I guess what people are waiting for were announced. I think we got Mario Kart and Smash Bros this time around. But hey, the new
Mhm.
year's coming soon. Another couple months, and before you know it, 2025, maybe you could be the next world champion.
Your world championship signage starts here at LUTI.com.
That's honestly that should be a great a great motto to post. That's the next YouTube short. There you go.
Yeah.
So I think for me anyway, that's all the questions I personally had to come up with. But I'd like to give you this time to really talk about anything like else that maybe you'd want to discuss or bring to the table. Because for me, I've asked all the fun stuff that I could think of that were great topics.
I I'm honestly saying I've talked so much about Ludi. I think we've got pretty much anything. I do want to thank you though for hosting this. I think it was very nice. It was very professional. The other thing is um, join the fantasy bracket. Is why not? Right?
Hmm.
You can still sign up until Saturday. So if you have some time, I think it's fun. And you get to see how your teams do. So um, I would say those are mostly my shout outs for the stream. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure to have you. I mean, it's not every day that you get to talk with somebody that runs an event, and especially one that's been so successful that you've been helping run for so long, and find, little tidbits of information that, I'm sure like a lot of people just don't know about Eludi, and I think that's the fun part. That's
Mhm.
why I love doing this, is be able to give another alternative platform to discuss things that no one really questions, no one really asks about certain things. So I really want to give a huge thank you to you as well, just for coming out, discussing Ludi, and having this amazing this talk and everything. And giving some more information to those who will watch this and hopefully maybe are looking at to who maybe didn't play Ludi this time or looking to play next time.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I don't think any of us are really secretive about this sort of thing. I mean, obviously, we can't really give out individual like switch codes or whatever, but if you
Yeah.
have any questions about LOT or whatever, you can always ask. And I think we'll be fine answering anything. Um, some of us even like talking about it. So, why not try if you want to? Some of us might get annoyed. Some of the staff members get annoyed if you DM them, though. I also know those. So
Yeah.
maybe ask the right ones.
Maybe help desk. Maybe go through help desk. Squares. Maybe help desk would be the best way.
If you want to ask an help desk about how old LUTI work, then go ahead and we'll answer it.
Oh, I think you know what? This is my fun part. This is the fun part. I put this on Twitter, so everyone always asks when is the Ludi, but how is the Ludi?
Oh yeah, I'm Mr. LUTI, but I'm good.
Awesome. The Ludi is good. You heard it here first. The Ludi is doing well. Well, with that being said, that's going to be it for this episode of the Cactus Patch. Once again, Emil, huge thank you for coming on out and discussing Ludi. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you and ask you these really fun and great questions. So that's going to do it for us here over at the Cactus Patch. I was your host, Glitch Cactus, but please do call me Cactus. If I hear glitch one more time, it's going to pain me so. But thank you all, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Cactus Patch.
Yeah.